What did socialists use before candles? Electricity. The average cost of a single bottle of water sold in US is $1.45, while the average price for a gallon of gas is currently $3.42. Isn't that quite a phenomenon? Here's water, supposedly the prime example of a free good, and here is oil, which you have to extract from the ground, send it through a refinery, put the refined product through a pipeline, take it to a gasoline station, and you still get it for less than a gallon of bottled water. The question is, why? Price of energy in real terms adjusted for inflation has been going down for the past 150 years, although it might seem high at the gas pump today. This goes back to the way in which market operates with respect to exhaustible resources. Let's say you own a mine and there is only a certain amount of stuff in it. What is the most intelligent way for you to exploit it? In particular, should you produce and sell now, or should you hold it in the ground to sell later on? Well, you can see immediately what makes more sense. If you mine it right now, you get cash in the hand, which you can invest and earn interest on. So it will not pay you to keep it in the ground, unless later on when you mine it or sell it, you can get a price high enough to cover the interest that you could have earned in the meantime. If you think the price 5 years from now is going to be $3.42, and now it is $3.42, it will pay you to mine it now and not keep it in the ground. It will only pay you to keep it in the ground if you think the price will be higher in the future. Therefore, you have a very simple economical test of whether anything is an exhaustible resource. Is its price rising over time? But if we look at the price of energy and of oil, its real price has been going down over time. There are only two possible explanations. Either the oil companies are extremely stupid and short-sighted and have been throwing away billions of dollars, which seems to be a rather extreme assumption, because otherwise someone could just buy a few of them and set them on the sensible course. The only other explanation is that from an economic point of view, oil is not an exhaustible resource. Consider wheat, which you can keep growing, or automobiles, which you can keep manufacturing. When you have a reproducible product, there is no reason why its real price relative to other things should rise over time. If you have a Van Gogh that's never going to be produced again, well then its real price has to rise over time. But of course, if you have the ordinary painters who can paint pictures by the hundreds, there's no reason for those prices to be rising. So, in economic sense, oil, far from being an exhaustible resource, is a producible resource at more or less constant or indeed declining cost, because of the improvements in the technology of drilling, exploring, and so on. Politicians will tell you that we will run out of natural resources, so we need to predict how much future resources we will have, so we can start conserving it for future generations. That is obviously not the right approach. Nobody could foresee the discovery of electricity when there was no electricity. Nobody could foresee the discovery of oil, natural gas, nuclear power, or other sources of energy. Instead, what we need is an adjustment mechanism that will enable us to adapt to what happens as things develop. That mechanism is the price system. In fact, the reason why OPEC has a monopoly or why gas prices at the local gas station have been going up is precisely because politicians have not allowed the price system to work. We are less dependent on natural resources today than we were 50 or 100 years ago. We have more energy today than we had any time before in history, not only in volume, but also relative to a year's consumption, relative to population. So why is there this constant talk about energy crisis, and why is it more expensive to put gas in your car? The answer is a combination of three forces. The establishment of OPEC cartel monopoly in 1973, the mistaken diplomacy and cumulative government controls and regulations, and the change in philosophical attitudes of the public towards the role of the government in such affairs. When it comes to cartel, you will hear in the news that Saudi Arabia is resisting raising prices because she is a friend of ours, or Iraq is trying to raise prices because they are not friends. This, of course, is very superficial. There is a very well-developed theory on how cartel should be run. Suppose you were able to form a cartel. What should you do? What should be your practice? In the first place, you can only form a cartel effectively insofar as somehow you can restrict supplies. Unless you can keep down the amount available, there is no way in which you can raise the price. If you fix a high price, you must limit the amount sold to the amount people want to buy at that price. You know that it's hard for people to adjust right away, then if you give them some time. If the price rises to $10 a gallon tomorrow, people will continue to operate in the same patterns as yesterday. The demand will not be affected too much overnight. Subsequently, the higher price will give other people an incentive to produce substitutes, but it takes time. If you are going to produce green sources of energy or new oil wells, you will need time to develop them. Similarly with other substitutes. Therefore, the thing that is most obvious to you is that your monopoly power is very much greater at the time you form the cartel than it will be later on. And therefore, the sensible thing for you to do, the way to exploit a cartel, is first push up the price very high, and then over time, as people start to restrict their consumption and other sources of energy come in, you gradually let the price come down so as to take advantage of your less favorable position until ultimately the price is not only back to where it was supposed to be from the beginning, but actually lower. This is because when you come to the end of the process, there are many alternative sources of energy that you wouldn't have had if you didn't encourage them during your cartel rule. This is not only the most logical way to run a cartel, but this is how most cartels have been run throughout history. Think of Stevenson Rubber Cartel in the 1920s, where a group of rubber-producing countries got together and quadrupled price of rubber, or hit closer to home, the example of US playing the same role in the steel industry. Now, the price of oil has not been going down as fast as it should have because we and the rest of the world have been helping the cartel by producing bad governmental policies. We destroy the incentive for people to explore and produce more oil by imposing heavy taxes or restrictions on the exploration. In 1959, when foreign oil was relatively cheap and domestic oil was expensive and scarce, President Eisenhower imposed a quota on the amount of oil that can be imported from abroad. That made the price of oil in US $1.5 higher per barrel than the world market. In 1973, foreign oil became scarce and expensive because of cartel formation, and domestic oil became relatively cheap. So what did we do? We imposed tax on production of domestic oil and gave a subsidy to the foreign importation of oil. If you can think of more perverse policies, you have a better imagination than I do. We had the price controls on gas that set the maximum prices at which natural gas may be sold between the states in 1950s, followed by Nixon's general price controls on oil in 1971. This, of course, produced shortages and discouraged production, since nobody wants to sell their services at a loss. Just like Milton Friedman said, if you put the federal government in charge of the Sahara Desert, in 5 years there'd be a shortage of sand. Price controls encourage consumption, discourage production, increases the fraction of energy that comes from abroad, and establishes new interests in maintaining or imposing more controls. Third and final main factor are the philosophical attitudes of people. There is not a single argument on economic grounds of having the Department of Energy or regulation of the energy industry. Almost every single professional economist agrees, regardless of their political views. In fact, the budget of the Department of Energy in 2020 alone was $35.4 billion, which is more than the profits of 3 largest U.S. oil companies combined. Not only we are spending $3 a barrel to keep the price of oil from rising, we are now stuck with a Department of Energy that has over 14,000 full-time employees and over 90,000 contractors who have a strong interest in government having the control over the energy industry. The final question is, why are we moving in this direction? Why have we produced these counterproductive measures? The answer is very simple. It is politically profitable. When it comes to business, we expect people to act in ways that would be most profitable for them. We must apply the same interpretation in the political arena. Politicians are in the competition of winning votes, and they find it politically profitable to pretend they are protecting people from oil companies. When politicians enact price controls, the price of oil in the nearby gas station goes down, and it is very visible for everyone. The jobs that are lost in the process, driving out business out of your state or country, and other long-term effects are not very visible. So, politicians gain votes in one way and don't lose them in the other. There is a tendency to interpret votes in terms of what people believe. The capacity of the human being to adjust his or her beliefs to his or her interests cannot be underestimated. After all, energy is not the first industry that was nationalized. While the situation is not the most favorable one, we should not go to the other extreme and give up. We should not underestimate the ability of people to get around controls and regulations. There is a strong incentive for people around the world to find ways of getting around these bad laws. In fact, people who break bad laws and find ways to get around them are the last line of defense for freedom. People who can produce fake vaccine passports, for example, are the last line of defense in society today. If everything else fails, they at least provide the last resort. But as a result of people being incentivized to produce alternative methods of energy, price of oil will sooner or later come down and cartel will break down. This does not mean it was a mistake for them to form the cartel. They will just go back to the regular business of producing oil at a fair price, but they will already have this accumulated wealth. So we won't have shortages of energy and the price will eventually come down, but we will have a lower standard of living than we could have had, lower rate of growth, and we will be stuck with another major government parasite, making it more difficult to overcome adverse effects of the governmental controls on our lives. I hope you are having a nice day. Feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more videos, and as Milton Friedman said, a government solution to a problem is usually as bad as the problem itself.